Last summer, I got rid of an aphid and ant infestation in less than 9 days, and I did it with a powder that cost me only about $2. This garden bed had been heavily infested every single spring. I had tried neem oil, I had used insecticidal soap, I had picked the pests off by hand, I had even released ladybugs. None of it stayed effective. Then I took a small container of boric acid, mixed the powder with sugar and warm water, and the ant colony that had been protecting and farming those aphids was gone within a week. And this is exactly where it got really interesting for me. So I started researching why hardly anyone talks about this anymore. I found out that boric acid has been restricted or strictly regulated for garden use in 19 states. The whole thing is tied to pesticide approval rules that most home gardeners never hear about. At the same time, this exact powder has been used for pest control for more than 1,000 years, starting with Tibetan borax miners in the 8th century. Today, I'll show you step by step how I use this inexpensive pantry powder to get rid of ants, aphids, roaches, earwigs, squash bugs, and cutworms in a home garden without poisoning the soil. And make sure you stay until the end, because there is an old Tibetan addition to the bait recipe that roughly tripled the effect, and almost nobody uses it today. But let me back up a little. For almost 20 years, I fought garden pests the same way most people do. I sprayed whatever the garden center recommended. When that stopped working, I switched to organic products and sprayed neem oil on everything that moved every 5 days. I lost entire harvests to squash bugs. I lost a row of kale to aphids 3 summers in a row. If you know that cycle, listen closely. I was right there myself. I spent money and then watched the next rain wash it all away again. The turning point came when I randomly found an agricultural extension bulletin from 1948 in an antique bookstore. In it, boric acid bait was mentioned almost casually, about the same way we would talk about drip irrigation today, as something completely normal, proven, and widely known. That old bulletin sent me down a trail of research, and what I found completely changed how I look at pest control in the garden. Here is the story, because it explains exactly why this method is used the way it is. Borax was already being harvested from dry lake beds in Tibet in the 8th century. Tibetan traders transported it across the Himalayas to Persia and then to Europe. There it was used for all kinds of purposes, preserving meat, cleaning wool, and yes, also killing insects. In the 19th century, borax deposits were mined in Death Valley, California, and processed into boric acid, meaning a finer, whiter, and more concentrated powder. In the 1940s and 1950s, agricultural researchers, including teams from Purdue and the United States Department of Agriculture, carried out field trials with it. Those trials showed that boric acid in very low doses, around 1 to 5% in a sugar bait, could wipe out entire ant colonies within 7 to 10 days. The effect comes from disrupting the insect's digestive tract and damaging their exoskeleton from the inside out. And insects cannot develop resistance to it in the same way they can with many synthetic pesticides. You've never heard of it? Well, the reason is pretty simple. Boron is a micronutrient in soil. Plants need it, but only in very small amounts. If too much of it gets into the soil, it can build up and damage plants. Regulators were worried about misuse on a large agricultural scale and possible groundwater contamination. That is why, in many states, approvals for outdoor use were quietly withdrawn. For indoor ant traps, the product remained allowed. But the garden use, meaning the exact knowledge from those old extension bulletins, gradually disappeared. Home gardeners working with teaspoons were never the real problem the authorities were afraid of. Still, that knowledge was lost. Alright, here is how I use it in practice. The first thing you need to know, there are 2 powders that are often confused with each other. And if you use the wrong one here, your results will be much worse. Borax is sodium tetraborate, the product from the laundry aisle, often in green and white packaging. Boric acid is the processed form, finer, purer, and more concentrated. It is sold for controlling roaches and ants in hardware stores and online. For pest control in the garden, you want boric acid, not borax. A 1-pound container costs around $2 to $4 and lasts for about 3 full seasons in a normal home garden. Look for a label that says 99% boric acid. Technical grade. Don't use anything with fragrances, repellents, or unknown additives. You only need the plain white powder. Now I'll show you exactly how I make the bait. This is the sugar water method, and in my experience, it is the most effective way to use it in the garden. Why it works has to do with ant behavior. ants keep aphids like livestock. They carry them around, protect them from ladybugs, and feed on the sweet honeydew that aphids secrete. If you only kill the aphids, you can see the ants bring in new ones the next day. That is why you have to hit the colony. Here is my exact recipe. 1 cup of warm water, 3 tablespoons of white sugar completely dissolved in it. Then stir in 1 teaspoon of boric acid powder until it is no longer visible. That's all. This creates a solution of about 1%. That concentration is low enough for the worker ants to carry the bait back into the nest before they die. And that is exactly how the queen is reached. Soak cotton balls in the mixture. Place them in small, shallow lids, for example, lids from peanut butter jars. Put those lids on the ground near the ant trail and slide them under a rock or a piece of wood so rain does not dilute them. At the same time, this helps keep them more out of reach of children and pets. For each raised bed, 3 to 4 of these stations are usually enough. After about 48 hours, you will often see ant activity at these stations increase sharply. That is not a bad sign. On the contrary, it shows that the bait is being accepted. They are carrying it home. Between day 7 and day 9, the ant trails are usually empty, and once the aphids lose their protectors, they collapse much faster under pressure from natural predators. The next method is dusting. This technique is meant for direct contact with soft-bodied pests or pests hiding close to the soil. For squash bugs, cucumber beetles, earwigs, and cutworms that stay around the base of the plants, I use the dry powder. I take about 1/4 teaspoon of boric acid and dust it very lightly around the lower plant stem, never on the leaves, and never near flowers where pollinators are active. The easiest way to do this is with a small plastic squeeze bottle with a narrow tip, like the kind used in kitchens for sauces. The powder sticks to the insect's exoskeletons and attacks their outer waxy layer. As a result, they dry out within 24 to 72 hours. The usual approach would be to spray a broad-spectrum insecticide that not only hits the target pest, but can also harm pollinators, predatory beneficial insects, and soil life. The more restrained approach is to place a targeted mineral only where pollinators normally do not go. That makes a huge difference in how your garden continues to live afterward. After heavy rain, you have to apply it again because water dilutes and spreads the powder. I do this maybe 4 or 5 times during the whole season. Before I continue, I want to put something into perspective for a moment. What I'm showing you here is only one single building block of a larger system. Here on the channel, there is a lot of other good content that can help you. Many people have used it to roughly double their harvest on the same amount of space. I truly believe it can change what your garden produces next season. So let's keep going. The third method I want to show you is the perimeter barrier. This stops pests before they even move into the bed. Around the outside of each raised bed, I draw a very thin, dry line of boric acid powder. It is about 1/8 inch wide and sits about 2 inches away from the wooden frame. This creates a mineral barrier that ants, slugs, and earwigs will no longer willingly cross after contact. 1 pound of boric acid is enough to surround around 8 4x8 raised beds with a line like this. Why this works is pretty straightforward. The insects have to physically cross that line to reach your plants. As they do, they pick up the powder on their legs and bodies, and that takes care of the rest. The important thing is that this line stays dry, so apply it on a sunny morning and renew it after any rain of more than about 1/4 inch. If you garden in warmer zones, around zone 7 to 10, where ants are very active and put pressure on the garden almost all year, you should reapply every 3 to 4 weeks during the growing season. In cooler zones, meaning 3 to 6, 1 application in spring and another in midsummer are usually enough. The fourth point is protecting the soil, and this is exactly where many people make the critical mistakes. Boron is a micronutrient for plants. Your vegetables need it, but only in tiny amounts. Too much boron can cause yellow leaves, stunted growth, and in extreme cases, the plant can die. That is why my rule is very simple. Never work boric acid into the soil. Never. It belongs only on the surface, placed carefully in specific spots, in bait stations, or as an outer barrier. It is not mixed in and not raked in. If you stick to that, only a tiny amount of boron gets into the soil over the course of a season, spread across the whole bed. That is far below the range where your plants would run into problems. The fifth and final principle is protecting beneficial insects. Don't place bait stations directly next to flowering plants where bees are foraging. Don't dust plants that are currently blooming. Work early in the morning or at dusk, when pollinators are less active. And always cover your bait stations, for example with a rock, a tile, or an upside-down flower pot with a small entrance hole cut into the side. That way ants can get in, but pollinators do not accidentally end up in the bait. Now let's talk about the typical mistakes, because I have made all of them myself. The first mistake I see again and again, and one I made myself for years, is fighting aphids directly without touching the ant colony. You reduce the visible aphids, feel briefly successful, and 4 days later, they are back. Why? Because the colony is still alive and is bringing in new aphids. That is why the old method always targeted the farmer, not just the field. The second mistake is confusing borax with boric acid. Many people read a short post somewhere, then grab laundry borax, mix it far too strongly into sugar water, and kill the workers before they can bring the bait into the nest. The colony survives. The third mistake is overdosing. More does not help more here. If you dump tablespoons full of boric acid around a tomato plant, you will harm the plant. The fourth mistake is applying it during rain or heavy dew. Boric acid has to stay dry if it is supposed to work as a contact dust or barrier. If rain is forecast for the afternoon, wait instead. Work with the weather, not against the weather. And now comes the bonus tip. This tip improved my results from good to almost unbelievable. I found references to a special paste that traders used. It was not just borax powder and water, but borax mixed with a heavy, unrefined cane sugar. In India, it is called jaggery. In North America, the easiest available substitute is blackstrap molasses. That is exactly what I do today. To my normal bait recipe of 1 cup of warm water, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and 1 teaspoon of boric acid, I add 1 additional tablespoon of blackstrap molasses. Then I stir everything until it is fully dissolved. The reason for the stronger effect is that ants and roaches are much more attracted to complex sugars and trace minerals than to plain white sugar. The molasses makes the bait about 3 times more attractive. In comparison tests in my own garden, colonies with plain sugar bait took 9 or 10 days to collapse. With molasses, they were done in 5 or 6 days. Try it.